Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today, I want to share with you how to elicit intense emotional states. So why would it be important to elicit intense states? Well, sometimes for change work, we want to elicit intense states, right? So for things like collapsing anchors, if we're going to collapse an anchor, collapsing anchors is where you anchor the negative state, and then you anchor a resource state, and then you have the resource state flood and overpower the negative state, so it just washes it away, right? Well, in a technique like that, if you're going to use collapsing anchors to overcome a certain challenge or limitation, your resource state has to be sufficient enough to actually collapse that anchor. So you need a sufficiently strong, a sufficiently intense resource state. So that's one reason. Another reason is that, number one, it feels good to feel good. People typically, number one, have no idea how good you're capable of feeling. Sincerely, most people don't even know that they're able to go into such states intensely. They don't have the degree, the control, the ability to elicit within themselves the type of emotionally intense and pleasurable states that I'm talking about. And so for me, you also should know that you have this freedom, that you're walking around in this nervous system that is, capable of making you feel exquisite. I mean, exquisite. And you don't need a reason to feel wonderful. You can feel dynamite for no reason. And why shouldn't you? Another thing is when we feel good, we're releasing good chemicals in the brain, right? Dopamine, serotonin, excuse me. And these things increase neuroplasticity. They allow us to learn more better. And when I'm talking about learning, I'm not talking about learning your ABCs, writing the letters and the numbers of the alphabet. What I'm talking about is learning to do the things that matter, learning to change your behaviors, learning to build a successful business. That's the type of learning that matters to me at this stage in my life. So intense states are very useful, whether it's curiosity, whether it's ecstasy, whether it's confidence. We want to be able at least to have the freedom to go into intense states. So let's talk about what are the techniques that allow you to do this, right? So I'll remember the first time that because for me, I've always made it a practice to work with, people that I consider to be just really skilled coaches. Richard Bandler, when I went to a Bandler seminar, I was volunteering for exercises, regardless of whether or not I had that challenge, because I was determined that this man was going to work with me. He knew what he was doing. And I know that a skilled coach can do things that others can't. And one of the things that he did was elicit an intense state for me that blew my problem out of the water. And I've seen that with other great coaches. So what are some techniques? Number one, remember your submodalities, right? You know that when you're doing submodality work with somebody, they're going to have what we call driving submodalities. These are the drivers of the state, if you will, that it might be distance, right? It might be size, it might be brightness. It could be the volume of a voice. And inside of the kinesthetic submodalities, it might be speed, it might be pressure, it might be the texture, right? That there are certain submodalities that make that state stronger or not. And when you're doing your elicitations with people, because I'm sure as neurolinguistic programmers, you're doing elicitations with people, right? The other key to getting good at this is to do it, to practice. This is not something you can learn. You cannot learn NLP by watching videos. You must apply everything in order to learn anything. It's important. So when you're eliciting submodalities, you find out what are the driving submodalities and you test. You say, okay, now bring it closer. Does it feel better? Take it away. You find the drivers. So that's one. Two, there are techniques that are specifically designed for intensifying. Stacking anchors. Stacking anchors is for the purpose of either making a blended state or taking the resource you're looking for and stacking more of that resource into that anchor. right? So for example, if it's confidence and you want to elicit an intense state of confidence for your client or for yourself, or motivation or ecstasy or fun or whatever it is, you stack different examples into that anchor. And each time you do, what you're doing is you're flooding the mind body with the neurochemicals of that state, right? So stacking anchors, great technique to intensify states. And you'll see Tony Robbins does this at all of his seminars, right? He makes sure to, I think he calls it emotional flooding, where he'll ask you to remember 7 of the best experiences in your life, step into them, relive them as if you're there now, and really allow your mind body to flood with positive emotions. It's a great marketing technique as well, because what's happening, you're going into a peak state and you're seeing, you know, this head or this face up on this giant screen, and you're attaching those emotions with that face. So it's great marketing too, by the way. But it's also good for the participants. It feels good to feel good. We make better decisions, right? To quote Richard Bandler, when we feel good. Stacking anchors, spinning feelings. Speaking of Richard, NHR, neurohypnotic repatterning, is the process of tracing the sensations of a state. Like, for example, when you feel really curious about something, you know what it's like when you feel curious. For me, when I get really curious, I'm doing it now, look at me. There's this voice that goes, and then I get this sensation of like moving forward, the sensation of wanting to move towards it. And so if I take that sensation, you can trace the path of the sensation and you can spin it. So the sensation for me starts in my stomach and it moves up my body and it propels me forward. Well, I can start the sensation over so that it spins intensely. And I can spin it faster and faster, so I become more and more curious to the point where I have to know. And we can do this with any state. You can do it with confidence, you can do it with happiness, with motivation, and you can spin those feelings intensely. You also can do this to get rid of negative feelings, but what we're talking about here is amplifying good states, right? Spinning feelings, powerful technique. And I really want to invite you, by the way, to do the techniques until you get a result. So do it until you go into the intense state, or work with somebody who can help you go into the intense state. The first exposure to NLP that I ever had was a book called NLP for Dummies, which I'm not a fan of the name, because if you know NLP, you know that that presupposition is not one that we would use. However, I do like the authors. I know why they use that branding. It's a successful brand. It's a great way to get your message out there. That being said, in the steps of the book where it says, okay, remember a time when you feel really good, and then follow these steps, it's different than reading steps on a page or watching a video and having somebody who's experienced guide you through a process. It's an entirely different thing. Like, imagine trying to learn boxing from a book. Like, you can read about how, you know, you have to extend your fist straight out, rotate at the last second, and then snap it back. It's different than standing with a world-class boxer as he throws a jab, and your neurology, right? Because one of the ways we learn is by observation. We pick up on nonverbal cues. That boxer demonstrates the punch. Your body makes a map of what that's like, and then you can practice it. Well, with a coach, you're not just responding to the words. You're also responding to their tonality. You're responding to their intention. Yeah. And they're pacing you. So there is a difference. It is worthwhile to work with somebody. Lastly, I recommend the recursive swish pattern. So the recursive swish, if you're familiar with the classic swish, I have a great video series on that. You know, you take an image in your mind's eye of how you want to be, and you make that, you find the driving sub-modality. So if it's distance, you make it close. If it's size, it's big, etc., until you feel the absolute best. And you amplify it until it feels really good. And in the recursive swish, what you do is you step inside of it until you feel those feelings. And then as those feelings are intensifying to their absolute peak, you see another image of you feeling even better. And then you amplify the image again. And then you step into it. And you do that on several times, up to 10 times, until you're into a really nice state. You leave the last picture disassociated. So we have techniques for creating intense states. Now, of course, you have to know what the tool you're using is for. Some techniques are not, you don't need to do intense states for that, right? The fast phobia process is not about creating an intense state. It's about creating a disassociation for somebody. Okay. So we don't need always to anchor intensity. Sometimes what we're looking for is not intensity, but this comes back to knowing what the toolkit is for and knowing what set of things. Am I changing a belief here? Is the problem a state? Is the problem a strategy? But assuming you want to go into some intense states, these are some of my favorites to do just that. And if you're gonna learn NLP at some point, you have to have the experience of intentionally going into a state that feels so good, it surprises you that you could do that. And you can do that. All right. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure you're liking, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, ask some questions. I'd love to know, what have your experiences been? Are you using this stuff? Have you practiced these skills? Are you applying what you're learning? Upward inflection, question mark? Because if you do that, downward inflection, command tonality, you will learn at the deepest level. Signing out. I'll talk to you guys later.